Okay, let's dive right in. We all think we know Leonardo da Vinci, right? The name itself just conjures up this image of a mythic, perfect genius. But the real story, well, the real story is so much more complex and frankly, way more fascinating than the legend.
I mean, this is the standard line. It's what you'd read on a museum plaque or in the opening of a documentary. It paints this picture of a man who just effortlessly moved from one masterpiece to the next, a perfect, clean timeline of achievement.
But what if that comfortable narrative is completely wrong? We're going to challenge that whole idea. We're going to look at Leonardo not as some kind of god to be worshipped, but as a deeply human case study, a person with a totally unique and maybe even overwhelming way of seeing the world.
All right, first up, Section 1, Dismantling the Monument. We've got to get beyond this myth of perfection.
Which brings us to Section 2, System Error, Unfinished. This is about the evidence of an overloaded mind. Because you see, the biggest clue to understanding Leonardo isn't actually in what he finished. No, it's in the absolutely staggering amount of work he started with so much passion and just never completed.
And the evidence for this is everywhere. I mean, just look at the trail he left. Major art commissions like the Adoration of the Magi just abandoned. The legendary Battle of Anghiari fresco left as this glorious unfinished ruin. He drew up designs for hundreds of machines, flying contraptions, war machines that were never even built. And his anatomical studies, they were literally centuries ahead of their time, but he never put them together into the great book he planned.
Now, the easy explanation, the one we always hear, is crippling perfectionism, that he was just never satisfied. But that feels incomplete. A much more compelling reality starts to emerge when you look at the evidence. This wasn't just perfectionism, this was cognitive overload. His brain's to-do list, its processing queue, was constantly overflowing with new ideas and new questions.
So, what was causing this constant overload? That brings us to Section 3, the brain without an off switch. We're talking about a mind that couldn't just close task. His cognitive process seems to have been missing the mechanism to just say, okay, that's done, and move on.
You know, most of our minds work pretty linearly. We see something, we try to understand it, and then we complete the task. But Leonardo's mind, it seems like it was stuck in something we can call an inquiry loop. He was perpetually caught between seeing and understanding, where every single insight just opened up another deeper rabbit hole to go down.
Let's just imagine how this would play out. Say he starts to draw a face, a simple portrait, but then he gets obsessed with the muscles moving just beneath the skin. That leads him to want to dissect those muscles, which then leads him to the nerves that control them, then the blood vessels that feed them, then the heart that pumps the blood, and all of a sudden a simple painting has spiraled into this deep, bottomless investigation of human physiology. There's no endpoint. And this right here perfectly illustrates his whole perspective. For Leonardo, the world wasn't a gallery of objects just waiting to be painted. No, it was this vast, interconnected operating system, and his primary mission was to deconstruct it, to try and understand its source code.
And so for him, finishing a project was almost like a failure of curiosity. It meant you'd stopped asking questions. The real goal wasn't to deliver a final product. It was to open the next window of investigation, to just keep the process of seeing going.
So how does a mind like that function in the real world? Well, that brings us to Section 4, Out of Sync with the Era. This isn't about being ahead of his time, it's about being fundamentally incompatible.
We love saying that Leonardo was 500 years ahead of his time. It sounds great, right? But it kind of misses a more profound truth. He wasn't necessarily trying to invent the future. He was just completely incompatible with the operating system of the present he was born into.
Think about it. The Renaissance world was run by massive institutions, the church, powerful courts, rich merchants. And what did they need? They needed results, tangible things. They needed finished artworks to show off their power, symbols to reinforce faith, and they needed it all delivered on a schedule. And what did Leonardo's mind deliver instead? Unending processes, deep deconstructions of nature, and way more questions than answers.
Because of this, he never really fit in anywhere. He wasn't a loyal court painter. He wasn't a scientist in the way we think of one. He was certainly not a conventional religious thinker. He just existed as this kind of free-floating, loose node of knowledge, drifting between patrons and projects, but never fully plugging into any one system.
So where does all this reframing leave us? Well, that takes us to our final section, peeking into a brain, the loneliness of an overloaded mind.
Now, the point of all this is not to knock Leonardo off his pedestal.
Not at all. It's to understand the true nature of his genius and to really appreciate the profound costs that came with it. The myth of the flawless demigod is easy to admire, sure, but it's hard to learn anything from.
When you look at him this way, his legacy starts to shift. It's not just a checklist of famous masterpieces. His real legacy is the rare, incredible glimpse his notebooks give us into a brain running on a completely different architecture. A mind that saw how everything was connected so clearly that it could literally never stop processing all that information.
And so, framing Leonardo as an operating system that never shuts down, it leaves us with this powerful, almost unsettling question. It forces us to think about the immense burden that can come with that kind of extraordinary perception. What happens when your ability to see the world's structure completely outpaces your ability to just live a normal life inside of it?
You know the face, right? The beard, that famous self-portrait. You know the name. It's basically a synonym for genius. But you really know the mind behind the icon?
Because what we're exploring today is the strange, powerful, and almost alien operating system that was running inside his skull. An operating system that saw the world in a way no one else did. And the first piece of evidence? Well, it's hidden in plain sight, inside his most famous work.
Okay, so we're starting with the most famous painting in the world, but we're going to look at it in a completely different way.
That's right. This isn't just a painting. Not at all. It's a tool. It's an experiment, and it was designed to create an error in your brain.
Let's use a modern term for it, a cognitive bug. Think of it like a little piece of code that forces a computer into an infinite loop. Well, Leonardo designed the Mona Lisa to do the exact same thing, but to the human mind.
Here's how it works. You look at her face. Is she happy? Sad? Is that a mocking smile? Your brain desperately tries to slap a label on it, to just categorize the emotion, but it can't. The moment you think you've got it pinned down, poof, it slips away, and your brain tries another label. It's a loop that just never, ever resolves.
You know, the source material puts it perfectly. The painting's entire point is to stop you from closing the cognitive file. He doesn't want you to decide if she's happy or sad. He wants you to stay suspended, just perpetually processing.
And look, this was absolutely not an accident. A guy who literally dissected human faces to understand every single muscle, he wasn't being accidentally ambiguous. No, this was deliberate, a form of brain hacking executed with paint and canvas 5 centuries before we even had the words for it.
But this drive to analyze everything, it went so much further than just painting. To really understand reality, Leonardo was willing to break one of his era's biggest taboos.
To get how radical this was, you have to understand the world he lived in. The prevailing dogma, the standard thinking, was that the body was this sacred vessel. It belonged to God, period. But Leonardo, he saw something totally different. He saw an operational system, a machine that you could take apart, study, and, well, reverse engineer.
And man, did he pursue this idea. We're talking about over 100 human corpses that he dissected. This wasn't some casual academic interest, you know? This was a systematic, almost industrial-level effort to deconstruct the human machine, all while defying the most sacred beliefs of his society. So why? Why do it? This quote, I think, really gets to the heart of it. For Leonardo, things like the church, social norms, even ethics, they all just became secondary. His main driver, the most important value to him, was the need to understand. And ultimately, that's what set him apart. He wasn't loyal to the stories people told about reality, you know, the religious stories or whatever. His loyalty was to reality itself in all its messy, mechanical glory. He just had to see it with his own 2 eyes. So if his mind was this different, what exactly was it? You know, the best modern analogy we have for it is a kind of primitive artificial intelligence. Think of it like this. You've got a system that can absorb just insane amounts of data, from anatomy to how birds fly, and it's absolutely brilliant at spotting patterns. But, and this is the big but, it had a major flaw in its architecture when it came to actually producing finished, stable products. We can call it the Da Vinci loop. Here's how it went. Step 1, he'd ingest a ton of data just by watching things. Step 2, he'd analyze the patterns with unbelievable precision, sketching out every little detail. Step 3, he'd design a whole system based on what he saw. But then, step 4, nothing.
the process would just stop. The brilliant idea trapped as a drawing in a notebook.
And we're talking about concepts that could have literally changed the world. Flying machines, armored tanks, robotic musical instruments. And these weren't just doodles, okay? They were detailed schematics for revolutionary tech, all of them just left unfinished.
So the big question is, why didn't he build them? And it wasn't just that the technology of his time was holding him back. It was actually a feature of his own mind. See, for Leonardo, the act of reverse engineering reality, of truly understanding how something worked, that was the goal. Building the thing? That was secondary, almost like an afterthought. The real prize was the discovery itself.
So, what does it all mean? What's it like to have a mind like this? To have, like, a modern operating system running on ancient hardware, in a world that just wasn't ready for it?
I mean, he thought in terms of systems, feedback loops, mechanical principles, a completely modern way of seeing the world. But he was trapped in an era that couldn't give him the tools or the collaborators or even the right context for his ideas to actually take off.
The tragedy of his whole situation is captured perfectly in this quote. His brain was built for a scientific and technological age, but the world he was plugged into, it just wanted beautiful paintings and religious sculptures. It was a fundamental mismatch between his output and the world's input.
And the result of that mismatch, it wasn't just some abstract loss for history. It was a personal tragedy for him. I mean, imagine being a supercomputer connected to an old dial-up modem. The loneliness of being the single, massive node of knowledge, completely out of sync with the entire network around you, it must have been just profound.
It leaves us with one final, kind of unsettling question. Leonardo da Vinci, he wasn't just a man ahead of his time. He was a mind that had literally evolved beyond the capacity of its own environment. And it forces us to ask, what really happens when a mind outgrows the world it was born into?
In this explainer, we're going to dig into the personal cost of being Leonardo and really question what genius even means.
For centuries, this is the image we've been sold, a perfect, almost godlike figure. Confidence, all-knowing, nailing everything he tried. That's the myth. That's the statue that culture built. But it's just that, a myth. And it hides a reality that's way more complex, and honestly, a lot more human.
And this is the question that just flips the whole script. Instead of just oohing and awing at his achievements, our source material forces us to ask, what did it actually cost? What was it like to live inside that head 24/7? This one question is our way into a totally different story about genius. Okay, so to really get a handle on that price, we have to look past the highlight reel. Forget the fame, the masterpieces, all of that stuff for a second. Because when you actually look at the patterns of his life, a very, very different picture starts to take shape. One that really doesn't fit in that neat little perfect genius box. I mean, think about it. His life just doesn't follow the typical great master playbook. He didn't have a normal family life. Unlike pretty much every other big artist, he never set up a stable school of followers to carry on his work. He left behind 0 complete, organized books on his philosophy. His life was just this constant churn of moving, finding new patrons, starting over, and, of course, a whole bunch of famously unfinished projects. This is such a great way to put it. His life was perpetually in beta mode. It was never the finished, polished 1.0 release. It was just a constant stream of updates, patches, and experiments. And this wasn't some kind of flaw. No, this was his basic operating system. So why? What was causing this life stuck in beta? Well, the answer isn't that he was unfocused. It's that he had a unique way of seeing the world. He basically had a brain that came without an off switch.
For most of us, a rock is just a rock. A smile is just a smile.
But not for Leonardo. For him, everything was a system. He saw the world in layers. He saw the hidden structures, the tiny mechanisms, the invisible patterns that made everything work. Nothing was ever just what it was. It was always part of a bigger, more complicated web. And this was the question that his brain just could not stop asking over and over. Okay, why is it like this? And what if I just tweak this one little thing? What happens then? Seeing the world this way opens up an infinite number of possibilities, sure. But our source suggests that every single one of those possibilities can also be a source of, massive anxiety. In fact, you could almost see this incredible perception as a kind of cognitive bug, a glitch in his awareness. He just saw too much. And the perfect example of this is the one painting he dragged around with him his whole life, the one he was always messing with, never finishing, the Mona Lisa. For him, it wasn't just a portrait. It was an unsolvable problem.
Think about her eyes. For Leonardo, painting them wasn't just about getting the color right. No way. It was about understanding the physics of the human eye. The way light refracts through a lens, the subtle tension in the muscles around the eye that might give away a hidden thought. He saw 1,000 different variables in just a single glance. That's an impossible amount of data to get down perfectly on canvas.
And that famous smile? It's not really a smile, is it? It's the result of dozens of muscles pulling in different directions. It's the play of shadow and light. It's the total ambiguity of what a person is actually feeling. For him, this wasn't some simple expression you just capture. It was an unsolved equation, a problem he obsessed over for years and years. So, after all that, what did he actually leave behind? You know, when we want to turn someone into an icon, we tend to package up their work all neat and tidy and call it a legacy. But if we're being real, Leonardo's work just refuses to be packaged like that. So history wants to give us the version on the left, a complete system, a closed doctrine, a clear path to follow. But the reality of what Leonardo left behind, it's the pile of loose files on the right. It wasn't a finished roadmap. It was an open system of questions that he never, ever closed. And this brings us to a completely different way of thinking about his genius. Maybe his real gift wasn't in finding all the answers. Maybe it was his incredible, unique ability to just live in that state of not yet answered. He didn't try to fold the world up neatly into a book. He just let it stay open and messy and unresolved, even if that meant his own life felt unfinished too. So this leads us to our final and maybe most provocative point. We're so used to thinking of incredible intelligence as a gift, right? A superpower. But what if, when you push it to a certain extreme, it stops being a gift and becomes something else entirely? I mean, modern self-help culture just loves to use Leonardo as a poster boy. You hear this stuff all the time. And yeah, it sounds inspiring, but it's such a shallow reading of his life. It celebrates the shiny surface, but it totally ignores the deep, unsettling reality that was going on underneath. And that leads to a pretty startling conclusion. The idea that seeing too much, understanding too deeply, isn't actually empowering. It's isolating. It's a weight. The ability to see the world's infinite complexity is maybe a heavier burden than any one person was ever meant to carry. And so, that's the question I want to leave you with. It's not about how to be more like Leonardo. The more honest and, frankly, more terrifying question is this. If you really started to see the world the way he did, with all its raw complexity, all of its hidden machinery just laid bare, could you ever go back to living a simple, peaceful life? Or would you be stuck in beta mode forever?